For months, the FIA has been Lewis Hamilton's enemy in every single headline. Penalty after penalty, fine after fine, margin after impossible margin. But at the Belgian Grand Prix, something happened that completely broke that pattern. And by the time you finish this video, you're going to see the FIA in a way you probably haven't all season. Because this time, when a mechanic went down on live television during a Ferrari pit stop, the governing body didn't reach for the easy target. They didn't blame the driver. And what they did instead tells you something genuinely important about where the real problem inside Ferrari might actually be. Let's set the scene properly, because the details here matter enormously. During a pit stop at Spa, Ferrari reacted to a virtual safety car by double stacking their cars, bringing both Hamilton and Charles Leclerc into the pit lane together, back to back. In the chaos of that split-second decision, something went badly wrong. Hamilton had made a late request for a front wing adjustment. That request never made it through to the mechanic holding the wing tool. When the green light activated, Hamilton set off exactly as instructed, with no way of knowing a mechanic was still moving into position near his car, unaware the stop had already been triggered. The mechanic stepped directly into the path of the moving car and was knocked to the ground. Hamilton's reaction in that exact moment tells you everything about how seriously he took what had just happened. He stopped the car immediately and asked over team radio whether the mechanic was okay, clearly shaken, even though the fault sat entirely with a breakdown in Ferrari's internal communication rather than anything Hamilton himself had done wrong from inside the cockpit. The FIA launched a formal investigation right away, and this is where the story takes its genuinely surprising turn, the kind of turn most fans following this season's penalty saga probably didn't see coming. After reviewing video evidence and hearing directly from Ferrari's own team representative, the stewards concluded that Hamilton had done nothing wrong at all. Nothing. He was found to be, in the FIA's exact words, in no respect at fault, and if anything, he'd actually been disadvantaged by the entire incident himself. Instead, the punishment landed squarely on Ferrari, as an organization, a €30,000 fine, with 10,000 of that suspended for 12 months provided no similar incident happens again. Think about how significant that distinction actually is, especially against the backdrop of everything else that's happened this season. For months, the dominant narrative has been Hamilton versus the FIA, one contested penalty after another, arguments over sensor data, over millimeters, over tenths of a kilometer per hour. Here, the exact opposite played out. The governing body looked closely at a genuinely dangerous moment, a human being knocked to the ground during a live pit stop at over 200 miles an hour of racing happening just meters away, and correctly identified that the failure was systemic and procedural, not something a driver following his own team's instructions could have realistically controlled. The FIA's official explanation laid out precisely how the miscommunication unfolded. Hamilton had already been issued a 5-second time penalty from an earlier driving infringement, one that needed to be served before any physical work could even begin on his car. Meanwhile, Leclerc's stop was happening simultaneously in the neighboring garage space. The stewards described it as a complex and unusual combination of circumstances, one that wouldn't typically arise under normal pit stop conditions, essentially admitting outright that this specific sequence, penalty timing colliding directly with a double stack, created a genuine breakdown risk that Ferrari's standard procedures simply hadn't accounted for. And critically, Ferrari wasn't just fined and left to quietly move on from it. As part of the ruling, the stewards required the team to conduct a full formal review of their pit stop procedures and submit a detailed report back to the FIA outlining concrete remedial steps to prevent this exact scenario from ever happening again. That's a meaningfully different kind of consequence than simply telling a driver to be more careful next time. This is the governing body forcing genuine structural accountability directly onto the team itself. Here's why this specific moment deserves far more attention than it initially received, especially given everything else surrounding Hamilton this season. Fred Vasseur and Ferrari have spent months publicly pushing back against penalty decisions they viewed as excessive, questioning sensor readings, arguing over millimeter margins, describing an exhausting accumulation of small, frustrating calls piling up against their own driver. This time, when an actual dangerous incident occurred, involving real physical risk to a team member's safety, the FIA's response was measured, proportionate, and correctly placed responsibility exactly where it belonged. That distinction genuinely matters for the broader fairness conversation that's followed Hamilton throughout this entire year. If this were truly a case of a governing body reflexively targeting one specific driver regardless of circumstances, this was exactly the kind of incident where an unfair system would have found some way to penalize Hamilton anyway, for stopping too late, for not double-checking his surroundings, for anything at all. Instead, the stewards did the harder, more accurate investigative work of tracing the actual failure back to its real source inside Ferrari's own operation. This doesn't erase the broader pattern of contested penalties Hamilton has absorbed this season, the pit lane speeding calls decided by fractions of a kilometer per hour, grid penalties measured in millimeters that still deserve genuine scrutiny. But the Belgian Grand Prix ruling is worth remembering precisely because it proves the FIA is capable of nuanced, fair judgment when the evidence actually supports it, rather than defaulting to punishing the driver purely out of habit. So what does this actually mean heading into the rest of the season? Ferrari now has to prove they've genuinely fixed the procedural gap that put a mechanic in real physical danger, with that report presumably reviewed by the FIA before the season concludes. And for Hamilton specifically, this ruling stands as a rare, meaningful moment of vindication in a season that's otherwise been defined almost entirely by contested, razor-thin penalties working directly against him. Let me know in the comments. Do you think this ruling shows the FIA is capable of fairness when it genuinely matters? Or does it just make every other contested penalty this season look even more questionable by direct comparison? Subscribe for more, because between penalties, protests, and now genuine safety investigations, this season keeps finding entirely new layers to the Hamilton and FIA relationship.